I think that trauma caused the twist. Kind of sort of, when I talk about the God Kings, that's kind of, I think, what it settles as is in my mind, right? Because like prior to this 10,000 years ago period, we're not seeing violence. Roughly 10,000 years ago, so we had some monocrop agriculture before that along the Nile. We can trace that back to like 15 to 18,000 years ago. There's singular farms across Mesopotamian spaces, the Fertile Crescent, right? There's singular farms across those spaces prior to 10,000 years ago, but the gardening together, everybody doing this together to support a city, doesn't come until roughly 10,000 years ago. Our oldest one is in Jordan. Ain Ghazal is our oldest one that we have found that is actually evidence of a city. Göbekli Tepe and the other Tepe could be worship centers. They could be different things. There's no evidence that they're a city or agricultural based at all. So when we look at like the sagas, let me jump you somewhere else for a second just to explain a concept. When we look at the sagas, Snorri wrote the sagas 200 years after Christianity had taken control within Norway, within the Scandinavian areas. And because Snorri, or I guess it's Iceland actually, because Snorri was like a bishop, like he was at this point of time, the only people who are educated enough to write anyways are usually in the church, right? And so Snorri, when he wrote the sagas, used the word troll for the Sami. I, had done a video about this, and I had been talking about, I'm not sure where this starts. We see it in the sagas. It could be the way the Vikings are referring to the Sami. It could be not, because Snorri, right? So after talking to somebody in the comments on this video, he was like, absolutely, that came from Snorri. That's the Christianization part of it, right? So when we look at the sagas written 200 years later, we're getting information based on Christianity, not based on the time that the sagas happened, right? So when we're looking at the first writing, oftentimes we're not getting information based on that specific moment of time, but we're getting information based on 2,000 years earlier or 1,000 years earlier. And the reason I say that it's this far earlier is because we see the Bad Durenberg shaman is a great example of the memory of somebody powerful in your community. 600 years later, they're leaving offerings for this woman, so the memory of what happened hangs on in the communal memory, and it hangs on very frequently, I think, more factual than it really becomes in writing later on. I do believe oral tradition to be more on, when you look at oral tradition, the way the oral tradition is taught is you have to memorize. It increases your intelligence and your knowledge. And it also means that you're memorizing 3-line stanzas in or an iambic meter of rhythm of the voice that encourages memory. So you're memorizing them word for word. So when it's translated down, there's no difference in the translation. It's not the game of telephone everybody wants you to believe. It's translated down. This is Druidic with oral tradition in the 3-line stanzas, right? So if you take the Druids' way of teaching, they would do oral tradition, 3-line stanzas. And I'd teach you as a child the first 3 lines. And when you can repeat those back to me word for word for word, I go on to the next 3 lines, and you include the first 3 lines and speak the next 3 lines until it's word for word for word, right? That's what a bard is as a teacher. So when we're looking at that, we can see that the first writings are actually of stories from prior, right? We found out recently that our first author is a woman, right? Honestly, hieroglyphs predate cuneiform. So considering cuneiform, our first writing is kind of problematic for us, but our first person who wrote a novel was a woman. Our first documentation of the histories comes from women, right? And so the first documentation that we really have of histories are kings. And that's where we get like Sargon and the God Kings. Well, these are memories after the fact, right? They're not from the time that it's happening. They're way after the fact. So I think that when we're looking at the time when these kings are actually coming to rise, I think these are the kings from 8,000 years ago, 9,000 years ago, not the kings from 5,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago. And I think that when we're looking at this, what we're looking at is, take Sargon's story. We take a child who has been abandoned. He's floated down a river in a basket. A sustenance farmer picks him up, and raises him in a time when sustenance farming is as a hard scrabble of a life as you can possibly get, and you starve half the fucking time. Gathering and hunting was much healthier for us. We got way more food doing it, and we worked way less. But the sustenance farmer picks this child up. It's not his child. He raises this child. He isn't the kindest, and they don't always have food to eat. We know because of documented history that when people don't get enough of something in a childhood, they hoard that later. When we look at people who lived through the Great Depression, we see people who will hoard food. Hoard food, right? Because they starved through their childhood. We see a lot of people who were very broke, or money made a big thing to them, or was made a big thing to them when they were children, because maybe their parents had it, but they weren't given it, things like that. They'll hoard it later, right? You'll see the same thing with women, or with, like hoarding women, how many girlfriends you got, like just, you hoard shit. If you didn't have it, if you have a great lack of it, you'll hoard it. And we also see that things like abandonment of a child and a hard scrabble life as you're growing up will actually create psychopathy, will actually create things like MPD, right? So I think that this shift into this shift into agriculture, monocrop agriculture, and shift into having rulers is what gives us psychopathy. I don't think we have it innately in our species. I think if we look at the archaeological record and we look at the rise of violence, that there's no evidence that I've seen that states that we're killing people off because we think that they're bad. I think that if we look at this rise of violence and correlate it with what's going on with ownership of property, like you were talking about, right? The decision that I can not only own land, but I can own people, but I can own animals, but I can own this and I can own this. And then of course that ability to others, like it's the barbarians in the hills that are going to get you that ability to instill fear in the people that you consider your underlings and make them work hard for you so that you can hoard their shit, right? I think that creates psychopathy. I think that we don't have a presence of it prior. And the reason that I can't see a single species, even species that are venomous, their venom isn't venomous to them, right? Like you can't subsist, you can't grow, there's no sustainability. Toxicity in anything is antithesis by definition to growth, right? Things that, like, we all have cancer cells in our body. All of us, that's like, it's actually there for everybody. It's when the cancer cells start growing rapidly and becoming toxic or malignant that cancer is a bad thing, right?
Okay. Now I have a question about this. Okay, so psychopathy is not innate to us, but it's obviously kind of embedded in our structures. Now. Embedded in our structures now. Now, does that mean that like the structures need to be destroyed and will be destroyed as a basis of their foundation in psychopathy? Or
can I clarify something?
Yes,
structures
please.
As in society, or structures in my body? Because I was thinking as my body. So I just wanted to make sure. Do you mean society structure?
No, I meant society structure.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Please go on.
Yeah.
Structure, psychopathy within our societies. Absolutely. Yeah, the structure of government. Please. Thank you. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm like, it makes sense that the psychopathy that's built into the foundations of them will be their destruction. However, is it possible that we can not all be destroyed along with it? Like, okay, so I
firmly believe, and I don't really talk about this one on TikTok a lot. Okay, I don't really talk about this on TikTok a lot. I have a way I can overthrow our current government today, and I believe I could do it bloodlessly. At least in a huge part. Really? So I think, and this probably shouldn't be something that gets published in full. So part of my book topic, part of the book I'm writing a book right now, and the writing of the book is I've always wanted to write the story of my life, only because everybody tells me I have to write the story of my life because my childhood was extremely unusual, right? But I've always thought, when do you stop when you're writing the story of your life? So I've decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the story of my life up until this point we're at right now. But then I've got to finish the book. And how I'm going to finish the book is take it through my goal. Take it through what my end goal is, what I'm hoping to accomplish with what I'm doing on TikTok, what I'm hoping to accomplish with what I'm doing is in what part of the movement that I am trying to be active in and what movement I hope to see accomplished. So I'm going to take it there, right? So in my book, I believe that it is possible to overthrow the government by doing a couple of things. I think if, in my book, the person who chooses to lead these things, because I really don't want to be the person who leads them, the person who chooses to lead these things you can go and you can watch Congress. You go and you talk to your senator, and your senator can get you a ticket to sit in the gallery and watch Congress, right? Or to watch the House, right? You can also go, you apply to, and you can go and visit your congressman and stuff like that when the gallery is in action, right? I think if you got 2 people from every state, 100 people who petitioned their senators and went in and had, people outside as well with cell phones, with the ability to stream, okay, that you could jump over the gallery into the floor and live stream to the world. If you have enough, you have to make sure you got a bunch of people with enough following, right? Live stream to the world and hold a filibuster on the floor of the Congress led by the people. 2 representatives of every state led by the people. So if at the same point of time you had, in your Congresses in each state, they're not as strict in their rules. So that in the book, if you can have somebody that leads, a few hundred people in those Congresses to stand on those Congress floors and do the same thing, live stream the whole thing, filibuster. We're taking back our government. This is where we plan on going. We're taking back our government. This is where we plan on going. You have to have one person in the middle who's speaking loud enough. You want to make sure that they're speaking loud enough that not only they heard on all of the live streams, but they overtalk anybody else trying to talk on the Congress floor, right? You can't speak over them. If you can get people in every single state, you can shut down every single governmental branch. And then you can, now this is where, there's going to be states where there's going to be people that are coming in. So there might not all be bloodless, but you can do it with the least amount because you're not forming an entire army and going to battle. Right.
So, okay. Now on the basis, I get the point of this. How is this different from the storming of the White House with Donald Trump? I know it is, but just please be clear about Absolutely. How it's different.
So for one thing, you're not taking thousands of people. The next thing is they're not breaking down anything. They've been invited in. They've petitioned and gone in through all the legal pathways, and they are in the gallery to watch the Senate hearing. So them uniting and taking over the Senate floor, they're not breaking anything, right? They're not invading. They're not chasing down cops. They're not hitting anybody. They're not harming anybody, right? They're speaking. They're standing. Right? They're standing around in a huge circle around a central speaker to protect the speaker, right?
And what happens when, of course, because the authorities that be do not want the people in charge, no matter what, our so-called democracies happen, they don't want the people in charge. What happens when, the authorities for the oppressor come in?
So you have within the within the halls of the Congress, you have a certain number of active police officers, right? Active security within there. If you have a group outside that's preventing anybody else from going in, forming barricades to prevent anybody else from going in, the people within, first of all, the likelihood that they're just going to open fire on you is really low, right?
It's a bad look.
It's a bad look. It's a
It's a
bad
bad
look.
look.
It is 2 people from every state. So you have 2 representatives from every state.
Yeah.
We, the fucking people, you're going to open fire on us?
Yeah.
And you have to, I'm standing in the middle here and I am surrounded by 99 people. You have to fire through those 99 people.
But a bitch ain't one. Hit me.
To get to me, to even get to hit me, right? And the entire time I am screaming this shit. And you can't scream. The entire time I'm screaming this shit and you can't scream over me. Girl can be heard a block away with her own lungs. I don't even need a fucking loudspeaker, right? Nobody can speak over me when I choose not to, right? So
okay, and I have to ask a question because I started this conversation with an assumption that you were Canadian. Are you not Canadian?
no.
Why did I think you were Canadian?
I have Canadian siblings.
I don't know what
I grew up right south of the Canadian border. Like I spent, my 20s oftentimes in Canada, but like I am not a Canadian. I'm United States government. Are you under? I mean, I don't consider myself a citizen of the United States either. I mean, technically I am, but I
get it.
But no, I'm not in Canada. I'm in the Pacific Northwest, and that might be why you thought, because
Maybe.
the Pacific Northwest is very much Canadian. A good portion
Okay.
of it is Canadian. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Sorry, I had to clarify because you went right in with deep comfort speaking Congress and Senate, and I'm like, what's happening?
We don't have that. That's not
that's
how
not-
ours functions. What are you fucking talking
What's
about?
happening? Yes, exactly.
No,
Exactly.
So
Okay.
for overthrow of the United States of America in my book, this is how it will be done to overthrow the
In
United
your
States
book.
of America in my book. Just so everybody understands my book that's coming out in the next couple of years.
Oh my God. I mean, honestly, it's kind of ideal and it ticks all the boxes of grassroots.
Right. And there's no
change.
perfection in it. You have to okay, so I know that I could lead something like that in my book, because I know that in my book and I mean, me as a person, I don't want to be in control. In my book, when that's done, when you seize power, when you seize control, the main protagonist will be, turning it over to council, to people from every nation. Will be turning over, and the idea is I would have the protagonist maybe maintain a 6 months interim while you're voting in people, right? Where you're bringing people in with the understanding that as soon as everybody's voted in, even if it's prior to the 6 months, that the step down happens. And then it is a council of nations that makes the decision from forward. Now, of course, I realize that, there's no culture, color, or creed without internalized greed anymore. It's everywhere. So as we're working on including a council of nations, that council of nations will need the people within the nation to ensure that the people that they're choosing are not council members, like not the people who are often out there, that internalized greed coming through. So, but you also see that, even if you have 1 or 2 of those people slipping up, if you have, 500 nations sending 2 people each, right, then you have the ability to form a council of nations, right? And so I think for me, that's really how I'm hoping to work it within the book, to have the, and that's because I could not do it myself. And the reason I couldn't do myself is I couldn't risk prison. Like, I'm not going to jail for a long period of time at this point in my life. I have children. So this is why it's a book, but that's the book. And I think that we could absolutely. So I think, but the initial question was, how do we make sure, and I think this was the initial question, how do we make sure that, it doesn't devolve into the same thing, and it doesn't, devolve into, and I think for me, it is in placing that council of nations, making sure that it is not about any singular person leading it. And I think that we could do it bloodlessly if we attempted to do it bloodlessly, right? If we could attempt to use our voice we're at a point of time in history where we have such a voice we've never had before, right? And because of that, I think that if we all worked together to do that, we could absolutely do that everywhere, you know. I think that and it wouldn't look like that in every situation, but similar, you know, that thought process of uniting as people and saying, this is enough, we're done. Like, what the what do you think? You know?
Yeah, I'd also like to kind of inject in the conversation as well that I also believe in the magnitude and the magnitude of spirit to change things beyond our ability to even comprehend before they occur.
Yeah.
And this is new for me to speak very publicly and clearly about spirit without any kind of parable or fable or whatever in front of it. But I mean, I think it's the most important thing for me to share is this. And I don't care what it is, whatever your relationship to it is, but speaking our truth of spirit out into the world has miraculous impact.
Yeah. I think that manifestation has become kind of this white woman thought process anymore within like the United States. But honestly, for me, I believe that we are all energy. And I believe that we can see that scientifically, that every atom is just energy, and we're all formed of thousands of atoms of energy. And I believe that it is, I personally believe we've manifested this whole fucking thing matrix style. Like, that's my personal belief, that it is the uniting of so many thought processes of energy. I believe consciousness comes from energy uniting, you know, synapses aspiring. And so when enough consciousness came to being, it created a reality. And so I believe that we pretty much manifest this reality, right? Holodeck, whatever, you know, like I believe that we absolutely, now I believe that I manifest as much as I can. I send out as much energy as I can, but there are currently fucking 8 billion human beings on this planet whose energy is equal to mine. And then there are millions of trees whose energy is equal to mine, and there's dogs whose energy is equal to mine, and you know, like there's all these other species whose energy, you know, counts and contributes to this. So the manifestation isn't just my manifestation, so I can't control it on my own. But
it's not just physical, it's not just the world of form, it's all of ancestor, it's all of spirit, like it's all intertwined. There's a phraseology. How are you not embarrassed? I said it all wrong. It's so embarrassing. It's fite fuaite. Fite fuaite. Fite fuaite. It's Irish and Gaelic. Fite fuaite. I'm embarrassed that I said it wrong for like 6 months. Belief that everything is interwoven, intrinsically interwoven, and cannot be separated.
Yes. Well, and for me, and I didn't hear this in what you were saying, but I hear from so many people that equates one, singular. And for me, it never, ever reaches a point of singularity. For me, it is always a point of multiple, right? Like a community is, yes, a community, but there are always other communities, and the community itself is made up of so many that it is never a singular voice, a singular thought, a singular action, right? And when we aim towards thinking of any of this stuff as singular, that to me is where we miss an important foundational, I believe, animistic teaching, indigenous teaching, which is that one is always many.
Yes. Right? Oh my God, I didn't know where you were going with this. And I'm like, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Because I've had people actually tell me, oh, so you mean like the one being one? And it's like, I see that you see one as a singular. I never see one as a singular. I actually had somebody try to school me what indigenous people thought, and they used, you know, well, indigenous people look at it like this, and they were not indigenous. And they were trying to tell me what the indigenous people that they knew looked at it like. And I'm looking at them going, you're missing the whole point they were trying to teach you. You didn't hear the whole point that they were trying to teach you in that, because you took it to a singularity, and there is no singularity. It is always many. One is always many. It's always many voices and many minds and many thoughts and many interactions and many.
And all of them create the whole. And I think that is where the confusion comes, maybe, is one
People
singularity.
Think whole is one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Oh my God. You put words to something that
it's been something that's been hard for me recently. My book caused this conversation. Somebody read my book. A family member read my book, not on my the grow up side, but on the non-grow up side, read the book, and they were like, well, this is indigenous teachings and it means one, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, I think you mean singularity. Yeah, but I never mean singularity. Well, indigenous, no, okay, whatever you think. That's not it. You haven't grasped the concept that one is never one. It is always many. A whole is always a many. It is never a singular thought process. Well, I feel like even our body is not a singular. My body is comprised of many different organs. My body is a biome, right? Even my mouth is comprised of many different things to make my mouth function and work, especially when we're talking, right? True. Everything is comprised of the many. To get to any point of what we would view as one person or one box or one, I mean, even my box is comprised of many different parts that were put together, right?
It's true.
That to me is huge.
Yeah. No, that I like that. That's interesting. Yeah. That singularity thing, that oneness, because it's easy to say one, because it's all whole, and that's different than one. Whole is different than one. Interesting.
Well, and I think that whole and singular and all that stuff could be the same, yet I think that on our minds, we equate one differently than one should be equated, right? Because of the propaganda, because of the teaching, because of everything. Like we equate one person as being a singular being instead of seeing that singular being is compiled of many different parts, right? So
interesting. Well, sorry, just like it made me think of the desire for Western science to break everything, to find that one piece that makes up everything, and keep looking, like into infinity. You're going to keep looking and keep finding smaller and smaller pieces.
The atom's the smallest thing we found so far, but I'll guarantee you the atom is composed of many different things, right?
Oh, the atom isn't, though. Like they keep finding particles. And smaller and smaller pieces.
I hadn't even realized we found smaller than the atom.
Oh God, it's gone beyond that. It's layers and layers. Oh, the Higgs boson, the God particle. No, now they've got.
It's always got to be layers, though. It's always. And I think that's important, a concept that people. And I think the reason that we need to reach this concept on a global scale is when we talk about the whole, we're talking about the biome, and the health of the whole is the health of the biome. When we talk about the one, we're usually talking about some deity that gave us permission to do something, right? Yeah. And we're talking about why we have the right to be above and apart, right? It's very frequently that which sets us apart, right? So if we're talking about the one as that which sets us apart and gives us the right to destroy, because the whole doesn't matter because the one, right?
Oh, so interesting. Yeah, so gross.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it
so
really
gross. Well, but and the one spirit separate from the globe and body, different.
Have you read Braiding Sweetgrass?
Of course. Sorry, I didn't mean that to come out.
You're fine, but not everybody has. And I have to recommend it to everybody because she's amazing. But when she's talking
she's
about
amazing.
Eve meeting Sky Woman, right? For one woman, this was a good green earth that she had created. For another woman, it was something she had to pass through to get to her reward in the afterlife.
Oh,
right?
Fucking, I just got chills. It's so on point.
And it's so real because when this is the trial and tribulation that you have to pass through to get to your afterlife, you don't give a flying fuck about making sure it's healthy.
No, you can destroy it all if it'll bring the end times quicker, bring that miraculous return of your Christ that by the way never went anywhere. Like if you think about Christ as consciousness and wholeness. It didn't
I never understood the concept. I'll be real. Like,
Okay.
I was not raised with the understanding of God. I wasn't raised with
Okay.
an understanding of God. I was lucky enough that my dad was Southern Protestant and my mom was Irish Catholic in their raising. So by the time I was being raised, my mother had gotten away from her Irish Catholicism and had gone back to her Indigenous roots. And she was teaching me an Indigenous lifestyle, right? So she never took me to church. You know, they were Muslim for a year and a half when I was like 5, 6. And so I went to a Muslim school because there was a Muslim camp. It was a school, a boarding school escaping the genocide in Iran at the time. And so I went and I stayed there and I learned Islam. But that's the closest to a God that I ever got in my childhood. And I mean, it's not the closest to the God. That is what I got out of God in my childhood. And by the time I was 12 and decided to look at church myself, my parents were like, yeah, just don't bring it home. And then I went to church and went, God, you guys are rude to each other. Like, you guys don't practice what you preach on any level. And all you do is talk shit about each other and everybody else. Like, this ain't the life I want to be. So I never had a concept of God like that. Even my concept of creator was never a concept of like a singular, right? So I was really lucky in that, I think, that I never had to overcome that concept. I think so many people have to overcome that concept that there is this deity, this one that is doing this for us, you know?
Yeah, well, I didn't have a Christian upbringing. I stopped going to church when I was 6 because my parents were just done. My dad was very anti-religion, anti-Bible. But I still found that I had to decolonize my mind from Christian assumptions that I just absorbed and accepted. And a lot about like permission, who gives permission to connect to and have a relationship, what is God, and how that related to land in particular. And when I use land, I mean what you mean by biome. Like,
that
that's how I feel it in my heart, is land is the entirety of the whole.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And like, it's just a very recent thing that I healed a very, very deep wound that had separated wholeness from land and spirit from land. And so I don't know, whatever people want to talk about in the way of like spirit and God and whatever, I'm down with the conversation until any fragmentation comes in, any othering, any us versus them, anything that's not included in your wholeness is like a straight up stop. Like, no, all right, we need to address this because that's not real.
Well, and I have to say, I do disclude from my wholeness psychopathy that refuses to heal itself.
What's that? And what's that?
Well, most people who are MPD and things like that won't even acknowledge that they are, right?
Oh, okay.
Or won't even like.
Sorry, let me just clarify that. MPD, do you mean
narcissistic personality disorder?
Oh, N. I thought you said M this whole time. And I'm like, does she mean DID? Like,
no.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
No, but the dark triad: psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissistic personality disorder that are the dark triad, right? And psychopathy itself doesn't, and Machiavellianism and MPD, they don't see themselves as being anything wrong, right? And so they don't try and heal themselves. Right? And
did they just think that we're all like
they're
stupid
vampires and we're cattle?
Okay, all right, that was very clear.
That's the way that I can. That's the only thing that works for it in my mind. They're vampires and we're cattle.
So what is their purpose? How did that, is it just a little plague that evolved?
So when I was talking about Sargon, and
I'm going to stop you because you've brought that up like multitudes of times. I have no idea what that is, Sargon.
So
I was going to look it up later.
King. He's our first documented king. And when we look at Sargon as our first documented king, when we look at all the early documented kings, like all the kings that were written about or documented within like the hieroglyphs or things like that, right? All the documented kings all share pretty much the same story. We see it shared even down to Moses floating in a basket.
Okay, I was going to say, that's all I've been getting is the Moses story.
Right. Most of the Bible is just rewritten stories anyways.
Yeah.
Jesus is Mithra. I mean, most of the Bible is just rewritten stories anyways. But so our early god kings, starting with the documentation in Sargon, their childhoods are always so traumatic that you can see that you take that combined with their actions afterwards. All of them decide that they're the child of a god, right? The child of a deity. Moses didn't, but the rest of them decide that they're the child of Moses just decided he was chosen to speak for the deity. The rest of them decide that they're the child of a deity, right? For Sargon, he was the daughter or the son of a river goddess, right? They're all half god. They're all demigods. And all of them tend to unite people around them to create this city. And they frequently take bullies out to, like do the age-old mob tradition of, you must pay me to protect your land from the outsiders up there who are going to steal your stuff. So give me your stuff, right? So they unite people together to create a city to protect the people from the barbarians stealing their food, right? Now you have to pay me to steal your food. Now you also have to worship me because I am the son of a god, right? Or I'm the daughter of a god. So this is where we get, and I call them narcissistic god kings because when we look at this, the childhood and then the actions of the young adult and the early king and then the actions of the king are all demonstrative of what we believe causes narcissistic personality disorder in a childhood and what looks like the way narcissists work. Right? Most narcissists believe that they're special to some level. They're better than everybody else. They have a lack of empathy, a lack of compassion for others. And this is the same with Machiavellianism and psychopathy. I think psychopathy lacks compassion and narcissism lacks empathy. One lacks one and one lacks the other. I can't remember exactly.
What's the difference between compassion and empathy?
Empathy is... I empathize with you because I've put myself in your place and I can feel like you feel, kind of.
Okay.
Whereas compassion is, I see that you're hurting and I want to take care of it for you.
Okay.
And they're very much the same thing. It's just a manner of how you get to them, right? Like, is it the feeling rooted in your feeling for yourself and somebody else because you can empathize with them? Or is it rooted in you've never been there, but you can still feel compassion for it? Or, and we can talk about, there's frequently where you can mentally still put yourself in the place. And so you feel empathy. When we look at the narcissistic god kings, you can see that lack of empathy and compassion. You can see the creation of the manipulation, because othering is manipulation, right? And you can see the manipulation of, I'll protect you, so give me everything, you can start. Well, we started marrying them.
Oh, fuck.
Every single person on this planet today, outside of those in Turtle Island, are related to a king, if you translate it far enough back. Every single one of us. And the reason being is because the kings had the food. So their genealogy was able to be healthier to carry on to the next generation, to the next generation, to the next generation. That, and as you're growing your family and as a king, you have 10 sons, they've got to marry somebody, right? So, and you as a poor person or as a peasant or as any rank of society under the royal rank of society are trying to have enough, right? And so marrying into royalty, it becomes a quest for so many because it's the only way to get out of the under, right?
Oh my God, that just gave me like PTSD of like childhood. That's not very ladylike. No, but that there was this whole, that's not very ladylike. female behavior controlled with the phrase, "That's not very ladylike." Who the fuck knew? I didn't know what the fuck that meant when I was a kid. Now I get it. That's an inheritance that has roots in that design. Well, holy shit.
We don't even have to trace it back that far. You know, we've been trying to marry. We're still trying to marry up into the upper crust. So many people are still trying to marry rich.
Now, do you think, like, we're trying to, the god kings, the psychopathic god kings controlled the food, which is directly related to us not foraging anymore, so the earth not providing directly to us. It was controlled through
when you rip
farming.
When you rip out the entirety of the biome and you plant a monocrop in it, there's no biome left to feed you, right? I think that so along the Nile, great place for monocrop agriculture. The Nile, before it was dammed, refertilized itself twice a year. The banks of the Nile were constantly flooding. Then in that flooding, it refertilized the land. That's why the Nile has been the breadbasket of humanity as long as we've had nations, and why it was the cradle of humanity before then. Truly, we see every species along the Nile. The Nile has taken us back forever. So when we look at monocrop agriculture, it only really works in a place that it's replenished every year. This is why people were having such a hard scrabble time in different places, because they couldn't replenish it every year. When you rip out the entirety, so if you have Turtle Island, north to south, east to west, was a tended garden when the Europeans got here. They all document it. This is because as you walk through your forest, you are your harvest. When we talk about honorable harvest, and you know, because you've read Braiding Sweetgrass, right? Honorable harvest is only taking what you need, and you take it in the cycle of the plant needing pruned, right? So you keep a tended garden, and this tended garden, it gives nutrients to every other thing within the tended garden, right? Everything within the space provides nutrients, and that's how a biome exists, right? It coexists by providing to each other. The cycle of life, we call it, you know, many different things, but you know, like the animal that you kill, if you leave any part of it out, it goes back into the earth to replenish the earth, you know, like so we have that everywhere. And then they came in and ripped it all up and put a singular plant in it. And that singular plant didn't have the nutrients it needed, because the nutrients it needed just got yanked out, right? So I think that we absolutely caused our own disconnect, because we removed the biome, right? We have spaces where we've caused deserts, right? When we were talking about roots sinking in earlier, it is important for roots to sink in, because the top layer of soil, right, it will blow away in the wind if it doesn't have thick, dense roots to hold it down. Where they removed, you know, huge swaths of prairie grass and didn't replace it, it's now dust, you know, like, because you need those roots to sink into the ground to provide that stability for the earth, right? So when you've ripped that all out, so these narcissistic god kings, instead of having a sustenance farm here and one here and one here, and, you know, like, I'm down the river, you're up the river, you know, we're a little bit more nutriated because there's still other shit around, right? You take that all and you put it in one area. Engazal, the first city that we have based on this, actually caused turned the space into a barren desert within like 300 years from the start of the city, because of their monocrop agriculture and because of their husbandry of animals on the land around. So they would have the animals going out and eating everything out. And it was it's along a river in Jordan, and they literally ripped out the entirety along the river to plant their crops and built their city. Well, you know, you don't have that replenishment, that renewal of nutrients within the ground, right? So and it's rebuilt several times near the same space, like it replenished its land and then came back and stuff. But with the narcissistic god kings, I absolutely believe that it just caused disconnect, period. Right? So then we get this first thought process of other people are here to kill me, right? So now I have to pay you to protect right? So we get this first thought process that other is evil instead of good. And then we get this, thought process that land, which has always been a part of us, can be separate from us and owned by us, right? And
how, sorry, go
no, you're
ahead.
fine. But then through us to those kings, right? Because the kings own us and they own the land that we're working, right? So yeah, it really provides that disconnect, I think.
Wow. Yeah. So much disconnect. And why would you want to connect to a ground that isn't sustainable anymore, that we're turning into desert, and we don't feel safe in that ground either? Like it's a horrible
cycle.
It's such a cycle. And I can see why on Turtle Island we're chronically ungrounded, because you have to go through the fear of being fully in your body and grounded on this land and what has happened here in order to get grounded. And that's scary. Why not stay in your head?
Yeah.
Stay in your head.
Where are you going to ground? Probably 80% of us live in cities.
Yeah, but you can ground, you can have a little patch of grass,
but grass isn't grounding. I can't.
It's land. It's all land. Even concrete is land. It's all land.
But when you look at the fact of land as being more than just the patch of earth beneath your toes, and look at land as being the entirety of the biome around, right? So if I am walking out onto that grass that's outside of my apartment, right, I am walking on something that, because it doesn't have the diversity of the biome, right? Because the grass itself is not a diverse thing. It doesn't have, I can probably sit down and connect to the bugs. I have several times, but there's not the diversity, the trees, the birds, the scents on the air, right? You can connect and you can sit down and you can meditate, right? There is still a significant level of disconnect. Having grown up like in the middle of the woods in a teepee for half of my life, like I can't here. I can go and I can sit and connect to what's here, but the depth of this connection is completely different than the depth of the connection I have if I am in the mountains, or, in a space that's not covered in concrete, or in a space that's not, 1,000 cars going by, right? In a space that it is the biome to connect to, right? So you can connect. Yes, absolutely. I just feel like there is still this level of disconnect because it's not connecting to the whole of it, because you're only getting a small piece of it. And even if you dig down in some places, there's still these like blocks, right? Like there's this places we have here in Portland where they are actually reclaiming what was a biohazard dump, basically. And they have put like, I think it's like polyurethane or something over the top of it. They've capped it and they have where it releases, and over it, they have turned it into a park. And one of the native gardens that we have here, one of the indigenous gardens, indigenous controlled areas that we have is there. And so we have, levels of land that you can sit and you can connect to. But as you go down, now you have this dump that's, here between the rest of, and it's reclaiming and regrowing and reintegrating it into the biome. So there is a healthiness to it, right? And yet it's still like, there's layers. And that
I take cities. Sorry?
That is that disconnect with cities from the first, with the narcissistic God kings, is because you're removing part of the biome, right?
I take your point, and I also would like to encourage anyone that you don't need to go out to virgin forest in order to connect with earth. That's just what I want to be really clear about. Like, it's not anywhere is like a place to start. Even if it's a pot of earth in your home, that's a place to start to connect.
And that is the truth. And I don't want to tell people, especially people who are having a hard time finding space to connect and finding space to do, that you can't. You can. And like I said, I did say, I go out and I sit in the grass, my only point in all of it was that there is still that disconnect that we were talking about with the cities, that we do find. It does not mean that you cannot, and important in the fact that it's all a part of the biome is the fact that part of your biome is the other animals, like your cat, your dog, your neighbors, you know, your people around you, part of the connection of the biome. And you can feel that and see that and interact with that as you're connecting, you know, even if you're sitting out on your back porch, right? If you just go outside and sit on your back porch and you've got concrete underneath you and a plastic chair, you're still interconnecting to the biome. The biome is still there. Yeah.